Muscular, wealthy CEO finds surrogate as a virgin. What he did next shocked he. The doctor's voice faded into distant background noise as Camille Brooks focused on the final line of the file. She'd reviewed dozens of these documents before, concise, clinical, detached. But this one stopped her cold. In the lower right corner of the intake form, it read, "Patient has never been sexually active." Damian Wolf didn't flinch. He kept speaking with his usual calm rhythm, as if reading from a script, talking about hormone cycles, uterine lining prep, and implantation rates. Camille sat upright on the exam bench, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes locked forward like armor forged in silence. Damian said nothing, didn't move. His grip on the folder tightened slightly, his gaze fixed on her, not with judgment, but something harder to name. The doctor continued, "Given her first-time status, we'll begin with..." "Stop!" The word came low, clipped, and final. The entire room froze. Camille turned her head slightly toward him but didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her jaw stayed firm, her eyes sharp as glass. Damian closed the folder. "Cancel the procedure," he said to the doctor. The man blinked. "Sir, everything's in place. Her numbers are perfect." "I said stop." Camille held her breath, but didn't show it. Her voice was soft but steady. "So this disqualifies me?" This time Damian really looked at her. "You've never," he asked, not as a challenge, just a question that felt misplaced in such a sterile room. She met his eyes. "That's correct." "Does that change things, Mr. Wolf?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, the quiet scrape of his chair on the polished floor the only sound, and turned toward the doctor. "Everyone out!" The nurse and technician hesitated. The doctor looked uneasy, but they left. Camille remained still, chin high. She was done explaining herself. And that's when he finally spoke. He didn't pace, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, tall, unreadable, still. "If you're uncomfortable, just say so," she said plainly. "I'm not here for pity." Damian was quiet. Then his voice dropped. Gravel, rough, calm, direct. "I'm not the kind of man who takes a woman's first time from a place of desperation." Camille didn't move. She remained seated on the exam bench, her hands still laced tightly in her lap. Not out of fear, but because some moments demand stillness, move too soon, and you lose ground. And Camille had lived long enough to know that truth by heart. Damian didn't rush either. He stood just a few steps away, but the space between them stretched with everything unspoken. No explanations, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet weight of two people trained in control. "You don't have to do this," he said at last. "Not like this." Camille tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't believe I have many options." "There are always options," he replied. "They're just not always visible." A breath. Then she answered, direct. "I need the money. My mother needs treatment. I've done the math." Damian nodded. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer empty lines like I understand. Camille continued, voice steady. "I know what I'm trading. I didn't come here naive." "No," he said. "You came here brave." She frowned slightly. "Bravery doesn't keep anyone alive, but it keeps you whole." Damian stepped forward, pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat, and placed it on the metal exam table between them. Camille didn't reach for it. "What is that?" she asked, voice dry. 45,000, he said. "The first round of your mother's treatment. I'll cover the rest after." She blinked. "You're canceling the procedure, but still paying for everything?" He nodded, no performance. "Why?" This time Damian didn't look away. "Because no woman should have to trade what she's kept sacred, just to keep someone she loves alive." There were no machines humming now, just silence, thick and heavy. Camille stepped back half a foot, not from fear, but as if the air had shifted. "This isn't charity," she warned, tone guarded. "No," he said softly. "It's respect." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know me." "No," he admitted, "but I know enough. I know I won't be the man who takes something sacred from a woman like you just to complete a contract." Camille didn't respond right away, but something in her face shifted, not softening, but cracking slightly at the edge. And if I still wanted to go through with it? She asked, voice quiet but sharp. Damien stepped forward. Not close, just enough so his voice wouldn't have to rise. I'd still say no, he answered. Camille's fingers curled tighter. You don't get to make choices for me. I know, he said, but I get to choose not to be the man who lets you lose yourself to save someone else. She looked up, and for the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Thin, fleeting, almost emotion. Not weakness, but the look of someone who, for a brief second, felt seen, and that, more than anything, scared her. Camille didn't respond, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything worth saying had already been lived. Every sacrifice, every quiet surrender, it had all led her to this moment. And to truly understand that, you'd have to go back, before the clinic, before the $500,000 contract, back to where it all began, a tiny kitchen in South Oakland, and the woman who taught Camille that silence could be a form of courage. Camille Brooks was born in the heart of Oakland, not the side filled with coffee shops and yoga studios, but the southern stretch where sirens overlapped with sitcoms leaking from tired apartment windows. She didn't grow up cushioned, but in the hum of late nights, where her mother came home smelling like burnt oil and fatigue. Her mother, Lena Brooks, was a cook at a city hospital, a woman who never complained about her swollen feet or the paycheck that barely covered rent, just tied up her hair, zipped her coat, and kept going. Lena wasn't the kind of mother who gave hugs every morning, but she always gave Camille the biggest piece of meat in the stew, even if all she ate was dry bread. Camille learned silence early, not from fear, but from understanding that some words don't change outcomes. Her dreams were quiet things, folded carefully between the cracks of her daily walks past crumbling brick buildings. At school, she never stood out, until one day her English teacher, Ms. Morales, asked her to stay after class. In her hands was Camille's short story submission. There's something visceral in your voice, she said. You should apply to NYU, creative writing. Camille did, and she got in, with a full scholarship. She packed her dream into 3 shirts, a worn pair of shoes, and a hope so fragile it made her chest ache. But then her mother began getting tired. First, dizzy spells, then shortness of breath. Until one night, Camille came home to find her sitting on the kitchen floor, leaning against the fridge, face pale as paper. Heart failure, stage 2, no insurance, no savings, just prescriptions longer than the light bill. Camille withdrew from NYU after her first year. She didn't cry, just boxed up her manuscript, shelved it, and got to work. She took a job teaching English at a public high school nearby, teaching the bluest eye by day, pulling espresso shots at a 24-hour cafe by night. On weekends, she changed bedpans, checked pulses, and washed her mother's hair. Sometimes she wrote short stories, diary entries. But most days, she just survived. Camille never resented anyone, never complained, because she didn't expect rescue. That's also why she never trusted pity. Pity had a smell, sweet but hollow, and she'd inhaled it too often in ER waiting rooms and charity offices. She learned to keep distance, never letting anyone touch the parts of her life she had fought to protect. Camille had never been in love, not truly. A delivery guy with a soft laugh, a nurse who read her poetry at a dive bar once. But they all vanished the moment she didn't need saving, when she didn't soften, when she wasn't broken. She figured if anyone was ever going to love her, they'd have to love all of it. The silence, the strength, the parts she never spoke aloud. She didn't want rescue, just someone who'd stay when all she had left was herself. When her mother was hospitalized the 3rd time, with no insurance, only invoices, Camille stood in the kitchen, glanced at the cracked fridge, and filled out the surrogacy application. Not on a desperate night, but on a quiet morning, after washing dishes and laying out her mother's meds, she made a spreadsheet. Line by line, hospital bills, rent, recovery costs, total, nearly $500,000. Then came the agency's call, high-profile client, discreet, generous, contract, $500,000. Camille didn't cry, didn't flinch. She said yes. She didn't feel bought. She felt like she was bartering, just as she always had. Her dreams, her youth, her time. Only this time, She was wagering her body, and the last thing she still owned. Camille had never expected anyone to pause because of her. She was used to weathering storms alone, to enduring in silence, and standing back up without help. So when Damian Wolf didn't just stop, but looked at her like a person instead of a transaction, she didn't know what to do with that. But to understand why that moment shook a man like him, we have to go back. Before the clinic, before he said the word respect, back to where he learned how to build an empire, but never quite learned how to belong to it. Damian Wolf didn't grow up in a house with polished floors or holiday fireplace mantles. He grew up on the third floor of a crumbling apartment complex in Detroit, where the heat gave out on the coldest nights. His mother died in a car crash when he was 8. His father, never really there to begin with, died with her. He was raised by his grandfather, a retired auto plant mechanic, who didn't speak much, but taught him how to hold a wrench and never bow his head. Damian wasn't coddled, he was forged. The boy with sharp eyes and quiet steps became the teen who knew how to fix outlets, stretch a dinner out of canned beans and boxed pasta, and stay quiet when the world got too loud to listen to anything real. He read like it was oxygen: physics, engineering, economics, anything that might give him a way out. By 16, Damian's SAT scores were nearly perfect. His college applications didn't beg. They outlined strategy. He got into MIT, full scholarship, but he didn't stop there. While his classmates dreamed of Google or Tesla, Damian was drafting his first startup pitch. Wolf Grid, a company built around urban renewable energy solutions, was born in a shared co-working space in Boston, backed only by a loan co-signed by his thesis advisor. 7 years later, Wolf Grid was valued at over $6 billion. Damian landed on the cover of Forbes, dubbed the quiet storm of clean tech. He acquired 3 companies, expanded to 4 continents. But at night, when he returned home, all he had was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that reminds you something's missing. Damian had been engaged 3 times. The first, a fellow MIT grad, brilliant and driven, but in love with the spotlight more than the man. The second, a fashion entrepreneur who spoke of loyalty, but pitched joint ventures behind his back before he even proposed. The third, she made him believe he was understood. She held his hand at family dinners, called his grandfather Pops, until he overheard her listing his name as a brand asset in a skincare pitch to a cousin. He ended it all, quietly, firmly. After that, he stopped looking. He attended galas and fundraisers, accompanied by women picked by PR. Beautiful, articulate, always camera ready, rarely soul ready. At work, Damian controlled everything. In love, he kept losing grip. He began considering fatherhood without the vulnerability. No emotion, no mess. Just a clean shortcut to legacy, a child. And that's when he turned to surrogacy. Camille Brooks's file came like any other. Ideal health, strong psychological profile, no red flags. But one line, small, unbolded, stopped him cold. Never sexually active. He read it 3 times. And when Camille walked into the consultation room, deep brown eyes, firm posture, and silence that carried weight, he knew that line wasn't just information. It was a warning, not because she was fragile, but because she was the kind of woman you don't touch without being changed. The kind who can't be bought, can't be handled, can't be forgotten. And that made every piece of his perfect plan suddenly feel far more fragile than he'd ever imagined. Damian once believed he could control everything: his work, his image, even the unpredictable shape of the future. But Camille was never part of the plan. And the way she walked into that room, quiet but not small, shifted something in the world he thought he had mastered. He walked out of that clinic that day without looking back. But the one thing he couldn't walk away from was her. Camille never expected him to come back. She was too familiar with being left, by people who said they'd stay, by systems that promised to protect, by dreams that got within reach, then vanished. So when Damian Wolf walked out of the clinic without a goodbye, she simply nodded to herself, as if confirming, this time too. 3 days passed. No texts, no calls, no envelope forwarded through the agency, just silence. Until Thursday afternoon, Camille had just left the local pharmacy when she spotted a black car parked by the curb. The window rolled down. And there he was, alone, no driver. "Just 5 minutes," and Damen said, "If you'll let me." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. They stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by traffic and tired afternoon light. He pulled a clean white envelope from his coat and handed it to her. "It's not money," he said before she could ask. Camille took it, but didn't open it. "What is it?" she asked. "An explanation," he replied, "and something I should have said that day, but didn't have the courage to." She didn't meet his eyes, just stared at the envelope, but her fingers trembled slightly around the edge of the paper. "I'm not used to people changing my plans," Camille said, "especially when I don't have any backup plans left." "I'm not here to change your decision," Damen said. "I'm here because I didn't want you walking away thinking you were just a line on a form." Camille looked up. Her gaze was always sharp, but this time it carried something bruised. "So what was I to you?" He took a moment before answering. Not out of hesitation, but to find the right words. "Someone who made me question the things I thought I knew for sure." She gave a dry laugh. "I don't need to be anyone's awakening. I just need people to keep their word." "I won't make promises," Damen said. "Only offer the truth." She was quiet, slipped the envelope into her pocket, nodded, not in agreement, but as if to end the conversation. But as she turned to walk away, she spoke. "If you really want to understand me, start by not turning me into a decision." 3 days later, Damen stood at her door again. This time, no envelope. Just a small bouquet wrapped in newspaper, and a silence that didn't ask for anything. Camille opened the door. No surprise, no smile, but she didn't close it. "She's asleep," she said, referring to her mother. "I won't stay long," Damen answered, voice low and honest. She stepped aside. He entered like someone who understood the space wasn't his. No compliments, no glancing around, just presence. He set the flowers on the table. Not fancy, just purple gerberas and sprigs of baby's breath. "She likes these," he said. "How do you know?" Camille asked. "You mentioned it in the file," Damen said. "Last page." She didn't respond, but something in her expression shifted. They sat in the narrow kitchen, where the stove still held oil stains and the counter tilted slightly. Damen didn't bring up money or contracts. Instead, he asked about Camille, not what he wanted to know, but what she wanted to share. And for the first time, she did. Not with defense, but like someone finally exhaling years of silence. When her mother stirred awake, she gave Damen a once-over and a tired smile. "You the man who wrote my daughter that letter?" Lena asked. Damen nodded. "I just wanted her to know she was never a number." Lena let out a raspy chuckle. "Good, 'cause she's the whole damn world to me." And in that moment, Damen Wolf, the man who'd stood on multi-million-dollar stages, sat in the small kitchen of an ordinary woman and realized this might be the only place that ever truly mattered. Damen didn't call after that day, didn't text, didn't send flowers, didn't try to follow up. He just let Camille breathe. And for her, that was the strangest part. Not the silence, but silence without expectation. 3 days later, they saw each other again. Not through an invitation or a formal meeting. Camille simply walked into the small corner bookstore she frequented every weekend, and there he was, standing in the American literature aisle, flipping through a James Baldwin novel. He looked up when he saw her. No surprise, no nervousness, just a simple nod, like he'd known they'd meet again, in a place like this. "Baldwin?" she asked. "His words never ask you to like them," Damen replied. "They just wait to be touched." She nodded slowly. "That's how I want to be seen." They sat in the tiny cafe next door. No music. No one recognized him as the man behind a billion-dollar company, and he didn't need to be recognized. The conversation started with easy things: weather, books, city noise. But it drifted quietly toward truth, the kind people don't usually say out loud when trying to seem okay. "You control everything, don't you?" Camille asked, not accusing, just observant. Damen nodded. "I thought if I stayed precise, logical, nothing could hurt me." "No, but people don't hurt you because you're careless," she said. "They hurt you because you're real." He didn't reply right away. "And you?" he asked. "Do you keep people at a distance out of fear or habit. Camille didn't flinch. Because I once gave myself to someone who didn't earn it. And when you do that, you don't get the whole version of yourself back. They didn't kiss that day, didn't touch, but somehow that made it feel more intimate, as if what they were building wasn't urgency, but trust. That night, Camille stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her small apartment. Her eyes stayed on her reflection, not to fix her hair or reapply lipstick, but to face herself. And for once, there was no fear in her gaze. A few hours later, she knocked on Damien's door. He opened it, wearing a soft sweater, a book still open in one hand. But when he saw her, he didn't ask, "Why are you here?" He just stepped back and left the door open. Camille walked in, hair damp from the evening mist, fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. "I'm not here because I'm weak," she said. "I'm here because I'm tired of being strong all the time." Damien didn't smile. He just nodded. "Then tonight, you don't have to be." They didn't fall into each other like in the movies. No clothes flying, no dramatic declarations. Instead, they sat beside each other, like two strangers who just realized they've always known each other. And when Damien touched her hand, there was no demand, only waiting. "You don't have to save me," Camille whispered. "I know," Damien replied. "I'm just here, if you want me to be." She looked into his eyes, longer than she'd ever dared look at anyone, then nodded. That night, when they lay together, skin to skin, it wasn't about the physical, it was about the door that opened. Damien didn't take, he welcomed. He didn't sleep with a woman, he connected with a soul. And Camille, the woman who thought she was only ever meant to be repaid, pitied, or passed by, finally understood. Sometimes being seen isn't about being fragile, it's about being strong enough to stop hiding. Camille left Damien's apartment on a damp gray morning. No note, no goodbye, just silence. He stood at the window long after she left, watching the steam from his coffee rise, wondering if giving her space was truly strength or just another way of not asking her to stay. She didn't look back, not even once. She was afraid that if she caught his eyes again, those eyes that had looked at her like she was something to be held, not handled, she'd stay. Her fingers tightened around her coat like armor, her steps fast, purposeful, as if staying 1 minute longer would make her believe in the very thing she'd taught herself to doubt her whole life. Safety. She didn't regret the night they shared, but she was afraid. Afraid of needing someone. Afraid that the hand that held her so gently could one day let go without warning. 3 days passed. No texts, no calls. Nothing from Damien. But his silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt intentional, like he was giving her space, letting her breathe. And that, more than any chase, unsettled her. She had known men who said love, but never listened. Men who held her down with expectations, not empathy. But Damien wasn't like them. He didn't chase. He didn't pull. He simply disappeared, like someone waiting to see if she would come back on her own. On the fourth night, Camille sat in bed, phone glowing dim in her hand. She typed and deleted, then again. Words swirled in her mind like a storm. She didn't want to ask, "Are you okay?" Afraid he'd say, "Always." She didn't want to text, "I miss you." That felt like surrender she wasn't ready for. So she turned the screen off and convinced herself silence was safer. The next morning, while taking out the trash, she heard a low, familiar engine. Her heart skipped. His motorcycle. The one he once said helped him escape the noise of the world. She turned quickly, but it wasn't him. She smiled, bittersweet and small. Day 6. Rain tapped the window. Camille sat by it, cradling a warm cup of tea. She didn't cry. She just felt stretched, like something inside her was holding on by a thread. And then she saw him, Damien, standing across the street under a faded awning, black coat, hands in pockets. No phone, no glances upward, no speeches, no pleading, just presence. Like he was holding space for her decision, not pressing, not performing. Camille gripped the windowsill. Her throat tightened. She'd once longed for someone like that. But now that he was here, She didn't know what to do with the ache of being seen so gently. An hour later, a knock, soft, measured. She opened the door. Damien stood there, damp from the rain, eyes steady, not apologetic, just honest. He stood there framed by the doorway, looking at her, not with urgency. "I don't want to own you," he said, voice low, steady. "I want to build with you, something without conditions, no contracts, no trade-offs, just us, choosing this together." Camille said nothing for a long while. She'd heard sweeter words before, lovelier promises, but never had someone told her she wasn't a missing piece they needed to be whole, that she didn't have to sacrifice herself to be loved. That was something she had never believed until now. The days that followed weren't fairy tales. She was still cautious. There were mornings she woke up with a knot in her chest, fearing this happiness would vanish like everything else once had. But Damien never rushed her. He didn't pull, didn't pressure. He simply stayed, with a patience that felt sacred. A man who knew that trust wasn't earned through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. Slowly, Camille allowed herself to believe. To believe that love didn't have to be bought with pain or self-erasure. To believe that she could be loved and still remain fully herself. When they came back together, this time it was different. No more walls, no more guarded touches. Camille no longer flinched from vulnerability. She let him see all of her, the scars, the softness, the parts she once kept hidden from the world. And Damien, he didn't take, he cherished every inch of her as if it were sacred. Not because she needed saving, but because she deserved a love rooted in reverence. They connected, not to complete each other, but to grow together. Their love wasn't born from lack. It was born from freedom, not one holding the other up, but both holding each other steady. 8 months later, tucked into a modest block of East Oakland, a handmade sign went up. No spotlights, no ceremony. Just 3 words carved into raw wood. The Worth Project. Under the slant of evening sun, the building looked less like a center and more like a promise. A space stitched together by trust and the quiet courage of those who'd once believed healing was beyond reach. Camille stood at its heart. Not on stage, not with a mic. She didn't instruct. She listened. She didn't teach. She told stories. The Worth Project wasn't born of strategy or spreadsheets. It began with a single question. Is there a place in this world where women like me and my mother don't have to prove their worth anymore? Damien never answered with speeches. He answered by building. He quietly funded the entire project, secured permits, handled logistics, and then stepped back, as if he too was learning how to love without taking. He said, "I don't need my name on any wall. I just need you to know. You don't have to trade anything else just to exist." Camille didn't respond. She just looked at him, as if to say, "Thank you for seeing me without trying to fix me." Lena, Camille's mother, had recovered, slowly but surely. Her voice still rasped, but her fire was back. She led storytelling circles for single mothers, not with scripts, but with soul. There were no podiums, just women sitting in circles, sipping tea, learning to breathe and to dream again. Camille became more than a founder. To the neighborhood, she was Sister Camille, the one who remembered your kids' names, who knew which door to knock on when things got hard. Damien was still a CEO, still crisp shirts, still billion-dollar calls. But 3 days a week, he sat quietly in a corner office at the center, making coffee, rewriting applications, or just listening. He didn't arrive to lead. He came to walk beside. They never married, no rings, no aisle. But when Camille was tired, Damien was the one who tucked her in. When he doubted himself, she rested her hand over his heart and said, "You're already enough, just keep going." They didn't finish each other. They stood side by side. Their love wasn't loud. It was quiet, consistent, rooted in doing the work together. Camille once believed legacy meant wealth or recognition. Now she knew. Legacy was the space you create so others feel brave enough to begin again. The Worth Project became that space. No glossy branding, no big banners, just a room in the city where women were reminded every day you were always enough. They had built something real, Not for recognition, but for resilience. Not to place their names on a wall, but to help others find their way back to themselves. But sometimes when you create from a place of truth, the universe responds. Not with noise or lights, but gently, quietly, like a child born into peace. And on a soft June morning, as the new campus of the Worth Project prepared to open its doors, Camille knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the truest kind of beginning. The sky hadn't fully brightened when Camille stood before the new building. The sun still hid behind the old trees lining the avenue, but enough light trickled in to illuminate the gold-etched sign. The Worth Project, West Oakland campus beneath it, in smaller print. Dignity, healing, future. She stood there for a long moment, not for the press, not for the cameras, just to breathe in something she'd spent years learning to believe. She belonged here. The grand opening was quiet, exactly the way Camille had wanted. No red ribbons, no flashy speeches, just real people. Single moms, teenagers, survivors, many of whom had once come through the original center silently, now returning just to say, "I'm still here." Lena, Camille's mother, sat in the front row, a soft amber shawl draped over her shoulders. Her face, once drawn and weary, now glowed with the kind of light that comes from being seen and still standing. When Camille took the mic, she didn't read from paper. She just looked out at the crowd, then back at her mother, and spoke. "My mother once said surviving isn't weakness. It's proof of worth. A declaration, I'm still standing, even when the world tried to erase me." Silence settled, not awkward, but full. Everyone was listening with their whole body. She went on. "The Worth Project wasn't built to save anyone. It was built to remind us that women don't have to give more of themselves just to be respected. You don't have to be perfect here. You just have to be real." At the back of the room, Damen held their son, August, in his arms. Not yet a year old, August blinked up at the ceiling, then down at the room full of strangers. His pacifier moved rhythmically in his mouth, his small fingers curling gently around the fabric of Damien's shirt. Damen wore no tie, no suit jacket, just a simple button-down, sleeves rolled. He didn't need to stand out. Everything he needed was already in front of him. As the speech ended, Camille stepped down from the podium. There were no roaring cheers, no confetti, only a moment, still and honest. She walked directly to them. Damen shifted August in his arms as she approached. Camille didn't speak. She didn't need to. With a quiet strength, she extended her hand, offering not a plea but a choice. Damen met it with equal calm, not to take, but to hold. 3 hands, one that once feared trusting, one that once tried to replace connection with control, and one that hadn't yet learned the world's weight, but had already been born into its gentlest form of strength. Love without transaction. There were no declarations, no promises of forever. Just a look passed between them, deep, steady, and real. In that moment, Camille no longer felt like she had to stand alone. Damen no longer needed to prove he was the better man. And August, in their arms, was gifted something generations before had never known, a beginning without breaking. Outside, the breeze brushed against newly painted walls. The trees planted by program graduates had started to root. A child laughed, chasing her own shadow across the sidewalk. Camille looked at the building she had once only dreamed of, then turned to the 2 souls who had made it more than brick and wood. "We're not perfect," she whispered, "but we're real." Damen nodded, and that was all he needed to say. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, written with real hands, full hearts, and present love.